All right, so in this video, I'm going to kind of go over how to do two of the programming options for your calculator that'll really simplify the math that you have to do for your upcoming tests and quizzes in this class. So the idea behind programming it is that you want it to be so that you can input the vector values and it'll spit out the answer to what you want it to do. So to create a program, you go to the program button here and scroll over twice to new, and then press 1 to say create new. Then you have to name it so that you can identify which one's which. So it's already in alpha lock, so you can just type the numbers that correspond to the letters. And we're going to start with the unit vector one, so we're just going to go U, N, I, T, V. You don't have to put the whole thing. So now it's got the name, and now it wants you to start writing. So the input is going to be your x, y, and z values of the vector that you want to find the unit vector of. So for example, when you're finding a force vector, you know how you have to go in and say, all right, here's a position vector I know. I need to make it a unit vector. So these would be the x, y, and z components of that position vector. So you want to go into program and go to I/O, so you scroll over 1, and then you go to 1 to say input, and then you want it to say input A. And then you're going to do that again for B and C. So now you have all your inputs. So essentially when you run this, it's going to pull up a question mark, and that's your A value. Then you press enter to submit that. Then it comes up with another question mark, that's your B, enter, question mark, C, enter. So now we have all our input values, but what do we actually have to do to calculate a unit vector? First, we have to find the magnitude of that vector. So that's the square root of all of the components squared added together. So it's going to be essentially the square root function. And then you type in alpha A squared plus alpha B squared plus alpha C squared, close parenthesis. And that's the actual math, but then we want to store it as a variable so we don't have to type it every time. So that's the STO with the arrow button down here. And then we're going to save that as another letter. I'm going to go with D. So that's the magnitude of that vector, but we want the unit vector. So then what we have to do is redefine the individual components. So the magnitude of the x component is going to be the original, or the x component of the unit vector is going to be the original x component divided by the magnitude. So that's what I did here. I did A divided by D, and then I want to store that as a different letter. So I'm going to store that as E. Then I'm going to do the same thing for B and C. So it's going to be B divided by D, store as F, and then C divided by D, stored as G. So now the calculator acknowledges that I have 3 new numbers, E, F, and G. And I know what those are, but I won't know what the numbers are unless I tell the calculator to display those numbers for me. So if I go to program, back to IO, and then number 3, which is DISP, which means display, I want it to display the value of E, display the value of F, and then display the value of G. And then that's the end. So then I can go to second quit, program, I'm going to click unit V, which is what I just did, and then I'm going to press enter, and there's that question mark I told you would come up. So that's asking me for the first thing I have to input, which is A, which is the x component of whatever vector you want the unit vector of. So we'll just say 7, we'll call the y vector that. So these are essentially the x, y, and z components of the unit vector in the direction that I just inputted. So that's the programming for the unit vector. Cross product is slightly more complicated, but by putting it into the calculator, you make it infinitely less difficult on exams and quizzes. So the beginning part is the same. I'm going to go to program, over to new, 1, and then I'm going to name it. I'm just going to call it CP. Oh, no. Name. Oh, it's already in alpha. Oh, wait, I took it out of alpha. So now I put it back in alpha. CP. So then I have to go in and make it input my 2 vectors. The important thing to know is that the way that you order it to input is very important. So for a moment calculation, for example, you do R cross F. That means that A, B, C has to be the XYZ component of your R vector. So A, B, C is going to be XYZ of R, and D, E, F is going to be XYZ of F. So when you do R cross F, it's going to be in that order, and that's very important. So I'm going to go to program input A, program input B, all the way to F. Oh no. Come on, D. Program input E, program input F. So again, now I have my ABC and my DEF, which are just the components of each of the vectors. So now I have to do the actual math part, or tell the calculator how to do the actual math part. And remember, if you're doing a cross product, right, if I'm looking for the I component, I do B times F minus C times E. That's exactly what I'm going to tell it to do. So I'm going to say B times F minus C times E. And that's the actual math, but again, I want to store it as a different letter. So I'm going to go store as G. And then I move on to the next one. So now I'm looking for the J component, which remember the J term is always negative. So you put that negative parentheses, and then I do A times F minus C times D. So then I go in here and I go alpha times F. What? I keep hitting the wrong one. Alpha, or A times F minus C times D. And then I close the parentheses, so now it's no longer calling something negative, and then I go store as alpha H. And then if I'm looking for the K component, it's A times E minus B times D. So then I can just go alpha A times alpha F, nope, E, alpha E minus alpha B times alpha D. And then again, I'm going to store that as I. Perfect. So again, now I have G, H, and I are the components of my vectors, but the only way I'm going to see what those components are is if I tell my calculator to display them at the end of the calculation. So I have to go in here, go over 1, go to display, and I want it to display G first, and then program display, I want it to display H second, and then finally I go over to display, and I want it to display I last. So then that is the entirety of my program. So when I go second quit, it saves automatically. And then I want to run the program, so I go into program again, and instead of scrolling over, I just go to the one that I just made, which is CP. And I click enter to start running it. And then it's going to prompt me with a question mark, which is my first input. So my first input is going to be 7, 3, 8, 5, 3. Oh, that's 53. Oh, well. This is going to be a weird vector. So basically what I'm saying is I want the calculation to be 7, 3, 8, and what was it, 53, 3, 2. That's the cross product I want the calculator to do. And then I run it, and those are the values that it comes back with for my component. So that's much easier to see. So that's the values of my actual cross product. So it's negative 18i plus 410j minus 138k. And that is how that works. So let me know if you have any questions after seeing that, but that's kind of the exact walkthrough of how to program it into your calculator and how to use it after it's done.